The first thing that gets you about Raqqa is how quiet it is. The heart of ISIS's caliphate has witnessed every stage of the civil war. First, there were peaceful protests that began against President Bashar al-Assad in the Arab Spring. Then, years of fighting between the government and rebels. Now, after 4 months of fierce fighting, Arab and Kurdish militias are celebrating. They've managed to drive the last of the ISIS militants out of the city after a hastily brokered evacuation deal last week. The scars left by the occupation and the battle are everywhere. Water towers blown up by ISIS, mosques with their windows missing. Schools and other public buildings are covered in bullet holes and their floors dug out into tunnels, which were used to help fighters escape. But there are no people. In Mosul, ISIS's Iraqi capital, life never really left the city even during the fighting, and normality is flourishing there now as schools and businesses reopen. But in Raqqa, an estimated 80% of the city has been destroyed. It is so heavily mined by ISIS, it is not safe to step off the road in most neighborhoods. Civilian houses are often booby-trapped. Door handles, shoes, even children's toys have been used to inflict the maximum amount of pain and death on innocent people trying to come home. One day, a Kurdish fighter pointed out a new black Mercedes that had pulled up outside a house. He was afraid it was a new ISIS car bomb deep behind the front line. When 2 men in their 60s came out of the front door, the tension dissipated. "We just come to check on our house," they explained, happy to find that it was still standing. One of them held up a niqab his wife left behind when they fled a few weeks ago and laughed about it. It wasn't clear if he realised how lucky he is that the house wasn't booby-trapped. Raqqa doesn't feel like a real city. Despite the dangers, it felt like walking around some kind of dystopian theme park. The only people calling Raqqa home at the moment are the fighters who have liberated it. The flags of varying Kurdish units are now everywhere in this Arab-majority town. YPG, or Kurdish People's Protection Units, is graffitied onto the walls of almost every building. Resistance is life, spray-painted onto the side of a mosque in English, must be the work of an international volunteer. And next to the mosque, a young woman in fatigues is bringing food from the doorstep of a house inside. She extends an invite inside, which is now a base for her unit. In the living room, 8 young Yazidi women are either making lunch or sitting on the floor, chatting, smoking, and braiding the edges of their famous scarves, personalising them with beads. This is the heavy weapons squad of the Sinjar Women's Protection Units, known as the YJS. Yazidi women are perhaps the most persecuted of all of those who have suffered in Syria's war. ISIS targeted their home of Sinjar in neighbouring Iraq with genocidal fury, lining up and shooting thousands of men and capturing women to be sold as slaves. All but one of the women in this room were trapped on Sinjar mountain without food and water as they waited to be rescued. They were lucky to escape alive.
یعنی خواسته که ما همون کافرانی ام مدرسه خلاص بکن ام مدرسه بخواندن یعنی روزه که بکابی فکری مده یعنی بچن همبری انسانی که بسکنن آن همبری دشمن بسکنن آن رفت و سلاح را بکن یعنی بریا فرمانی آن بیش نکتا فکری مده پشتی فرمانی پشتی گواه فرمان هاتی سرسری ما افقات العام هاتی سرسری ما یعنی دبیک و نو مزانی ام کارن یعنی ام سلاحی هلکن ام کارن یعنی تشتاقی بکن ام سلاحی راگن ام کارن یعنی دبیک هم آخا خوب پارزن هم جوابا خوب پارزن.
Learning how to defend themselves thanks to training from the Kurdish forces has changed these women's lives. Not one of them has a single regret about picking up a gun or taking part in the violence. They all have sisters, cousins and friends still in the jihadis' hands, with no idea of their safety or whereabouts after years without contact. Joining the fight against ISIS is partly about revenge.
يعني نجارك ندجارة هر كلمة تناقرن دخوازن كلمة تناقرن إذا تناقرن أما كل يعني أنا برانبري حتى دوي بشنجي بساكنن اما طول گردن و ازدی ام جبون و چنگه ام بل و چنگه بوونه ام بسیار.
The Kurdish-led movement in Rojava has started training more and more Yazidi and Arab men and women who have vowed that they will not be caught off guard by groups like ISIS again. But it's not just about fighting. The Kurds, who declared their independence at the beginning of the civil war, are trying to build a democratic and fairer society. Female emancipation is at the heart of their ideology. The YJS fighters come across as much younger than the battle-hardened soldiers that they really are. Darsim, the oldest, points out that the unit is made up of 20 and 21-year-olds because the older fighters have already been killed. They have witnessed and experienced extreme suffering and lost friends along the way. The bravery of the female fighters has inspired foreigners to join them. Kimi Taylor, a 28-year-old from Lancashire, made headlines earlier this year when it emerged she had smuggled herself into Syria to fight alongside them. Kimi stayed in the heart of Raqqa as long as possible, switching units to ensure she could stay fighting on the front line. She risked her life here because the Rojava project is something she believes in.
This building of the revolution, the building of the society and the empowerment of women especially really is changing society, and that people won't accept groups like Daesh again. It's about living together as people with different ethnicities and different religions and different genders, and everyone living together democratically with the power in their own hands, not with a regime or a dictatorship or a party above you. This is why I'm here, this is why I'm fighting for it. We're changing the education system, changing the economic system and the political system, all of the different aspects of life has been completely changed to take away from patriarchal thinking about dominating and competition.
The momentum behind the Kurdish movement won't end, Kimi says, which is part of the reason that, unlike many other foreign volunteers, she wants to stay in Syria. There is a society to build, elections to hold, women's history syllabuses to write, and schools and hospitals to rebuild.
And so I feel like everything that I've learned here and the amount of time that I've been here and the struggles that I've been through, that this is an education that I couldn't have got anywhere else.
With the fall of ISIS, Syria is moving into a new chapter of the war. Raqqa was a majority Arab town, and it is unlikely that the Syrian regime will allow the Kurds to keep control of it for long. More fighting between Assad's troops and Kurdish forces could be on the horizon. The Yazidi women signed up to fight against ISIS and to free their sisters. Now they will have to decide whether to stay under the banner of the Kurds to protect Rojava's revolution. Either way, life is very different for the women of the YJS now.